I have some submissions.
Well, did you just want to take a seat, Mr Bennett? I've got a few things I want to say first.
No worries.
Thanks. Now welcome Mr Owen Bennett from the Australian Unemployed Workers Union. The information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses and evidence has been provided to you. The committee has received your submission. I now invite you to make a short opening statement of a few minutes and then invite members of the committee to put questions to you. For the Hansard record, could you state your name and the capacity in which you appear before us today?
My name's Owen Bennett and I appear in front of you in my capacity as the Secretary of the Australian Unemployed Workers Union.
Okay. Do you have a short opening statement, Mr Bennett?
Yes.
Excellent.
Today is the worst time in Australian post-war history to be unemployed. The Australian Unemployed Workers Union have identified three major attacks currently being directed against unemployed workers. Firstly, there is the low rate of New Start, which is currently $381.10 per fortnight below the poverty line for a single unemployed worker, assuming that they are receiving maximum rent assistance. The last time New Start was increased in real terms was in 1994. Secondly, there is Australia's growing unemployment crisis. Going by the most recent figures released by the ABS and the Department of Employment, there are 11.25 job seekers competing for each job vacancy. This ratio is at a record high and has led to the average duration of unemployment being in excess of 3.5 years, an increase of more than 300% since 1995. Finally, there is the increasingly punitive array of activities and appointments that are being imposed on unemployed workers by a privatised and largely unregulated employment services industry. This crisis is an uncomfortable reality for Australian politicians who are at the very least complicit in the shameful manner in which unemployed workers are being treated. Rather than implementing the job creation programs that are so urgently needed to help the 1.8 million Australians looking for work, these chambers have instead continued to attack and vilify the unemployed, creating generations of disadvantage. I've brought with me today a collection of experiences from 14 unemployed workers and one max employment consultant to clearly illustrate this point. I encourage all senators present to read it. The bill before us today represents one of the worst attacks ever launched on the unemployed in this country. By giving the privately run employment service industry sweeping new powers to impose immediate financial penalties on unemployed workers, this bill will only serve to deepen their disadvantage, ultimately pushing them further away from employment. On this basis, the Unemployed Workers Union recommends that the bill be rejected in its entirety. As the Labor Party has recently indicated they will oppose 3 of the 5 proposals in this bill, today I will focus my attention on the other 2 apparently more popular proposals, namely the proposal to subject all unemployed workers to an immediate no-show, no-pay penalty if they miss an activity, and the proposal to give employment service providers expanded powers to penalise unemployed workers who fail to provide adequate proof of their job searches. There are 4 major issues the Australian Unemployed Workers Union would like to raise about expanding the no-show, no-pay penalty to all activities. Firstly, the immediate no-show, no-pay penalty eliminates the small window unemployed workers currently have to appeal against an unfair decision before their payment is reduced. It is worth noting that there is little protection in the Act against providers implementing this penalty arbitrarily and unfairly. These issues apply to all no-show, no-pay penalties proposed in the bill. Secondly, the proposal will lead to more cases of unemployed workers being bullied and intimidated by their employment service providers. This concern is made all the more pressing considering the perverse incentives given to employment service providers to penalise unemployed workers. Thirdly, if the current average penalty duration of 2.8 days continues, this proposal will result in sanctioned unemployed workers being docked at least 20% of their already insufficient New Start entitlement. It must be recognised that docking an unemployed worker's entitlement, even for 1 day, can result in considerable impoverishment and anxiety, which can lead to a cycle of mental illness, isolation and further penalties, which will inevitably drive unemployed workers away from employment, the opposite of what this bill intends. Finally, the Australian Unemployed Workers Union is deeply concerned that the time taken to re-engage with an activity could be even longer given the sporadic and unreliable nature of some activities. Moving along to the proposal regarding job search penalties, I would like to draw the committee's attention to 4 areas of concern. Firstly, unemployed workers in regional areas will be disproportionately affected by this proposal. Secondly, the proposal will lead to job search becoming a box-ticking exercise for many unemployed and prevent them concentrating their efforts on realistic jobs. Thirdly, there is no evidence to suggest this proposal is necessary. According to the department, since 2013, only 22 unemployed workers were investigated by DHS, for poor job search. Out of these cases, DHS found no evidence of improper conduct and did not implement one single penalty. And finally, as there is no explicit guidance in the Act of how this penalty will be implemented, there are no protections against employment service providers applying this measure arbitrarily and unfairly. I would also like just briefly to mention that the Australian Unemployed Workers Union has recently launched an advocacy hotline and received many stories from unemployed workers around this area, particularly regarding the punitive nature and unfair nature that employment service providers would bully them and intimidate them to do things that they aren't actually required to do by law. I look forward to addressing any questions the committee may have.
Thank you. Senator Lyons.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Mr Bennett. I'm a Labor senator, and the assertions you made about what Labor may or may not do are wrong. You can't half support a bill, so we'll either not support the bill or we'll seek amendments to the bill, so it's not correct to make those assertions. So in your submission, and thank you for coming here today, I've had some experience in my former life as a trade union official with your organisation, and I know that you don't have a lot of funds, so I certainly appreciate you coming along today. So you've pointed out in the bill that the proposed bill will significantly reduce the ability of New Start recipients to communicate their personal circumstances to an employment service provider, and you're not alone in making that assertion. A number of others have too. So could you explain in more detail exactly how that communication will be reduced with the proposed legislation?
Well, the bill proposes that in order to sign your job plan, you must sign on the spot, as you know. If not, you will get a financial penalty.
Yeah.
So I believe that significantly reduces the ability of an unemployed worker to negotiate fairly with their employment service provider about their needs and about their circumstances, because as we know, 1 in 4 New Start recipients have a significant disability. And I think there already is a problem with job plans currently where employment service providers put things on job plans that actually aren't able to do by law. And I think the effect of job plans are to really enshrine in an apparently legal document things that aren't actually legal.
So could you give me some examples of that, or what you mean by that?
Well, what I mean by that is, say, I would say the most prevalent form of employment service providers not acting they're not being beholden to the job active deed is when they inform unemployed workers that they must go and work for the Dole. And in some cases, they put that on the job plan, saying you must go and work for the Dole. But in many cases, that we've received calls from unemployed workers saying that they're being forced on work for the Dole and they're wondering what's going on. And then I find out that actually, they aren't in the work for the Dole phase even, or they might even be in paid work, so they're receiving a reduced New Start entitlement, so that makes them ineligible for work for the Dole. And these things can be put on the job plan and made to, I suppose, manipulate unemployed workers into thinking like they have to do those unfair and actually those requirements that have no basis in the job active deed. And there are other instances like that too.
Yeah, and do you think that happens because certainly the National Welfare Rights Network thought there was a bit of a one-size-fits-all in terms of a job plan? So do you think those errors happen because there is a reliance on a one-size-fits-all job plan?
I think the main reason for that problem that you bring up is the perverse incentives given to employment service providers to put people in these one-size-fits-all holes, if you will, because when it comes down to it, employment service providers make their money from outcomes. And the best way to achieve outcomes is not necessarily to appreciate all the particular personal circumstances of an unemployed worker. I myself had a recent interaction with my employment service provider, Wesley Mission in Melbourne, and they were informing me that I had to do work for the Dole. And I said to them, well, I've got some quite significant personal circumstance issues. My dad is currently sick, and I have a lot of volunteer work that I did, and they informed me that, there's nothing that they can do about that, and I have to go on to work for the Dole. And I found out later that I'm actually entitled to what's called an employment services assessment, which is something that I can request through Centrelink, and I did that assessment, and I found that really outrageous that my employment service provider did not inform me of that right that I have to have my personal circumstances assessed by Centrelink. And this is happening across the board, in my opinion, where vulnerable and disadvantaged unemployed workers who may have some sort of illness or some personal circumstances that's a barrier towards work are not being recognised, and they're not given their right to be assessed and have all their personal circumstances acknowledged. And this is something that employment service providers will continue to do unless they are regulated.
And so the Minister has made an assertion that some job seekers are treating service providers with contempt by not behaving appropriately at relevant appointments, but he didn't provide any evidence of such behaviour or how widespread that behaviour is. Is that anything you can inform the committee on?
Yeah, well, I would actually say the other way around, that I've heard a lot of evidence to suggest that employment service provider consultants have acted inappropriately, but I haven't heard any evidence to suggest that unemployed workers have acted inappropriately. So I think that this part of the bill should actually be directed the other way, towards employment service providers, because that is a really big concern of the Unemployed Workers Union. There just simply is no consequences for employment service providers when they give incorrect information or when they bully or intimidate unemployed workers, and it's a rampant problem. And I would say the vast majority of the calls we get in our advocacy hotline are from unemployed workers who feel bullied and intimidated, and they feel helpless. All they can do in that situation is call the Department of Employment National Customer Hotline, and that in many cases is unhelpful, or there's just no avenue of redress in that situation.
Yeah. So what do you advocate should be there in terms of a redress?
Well, there needs to be a government body dedicated to reviewing the behaviour of employment service providers.
Like an ombudsman or something like that?
Like an ombudsman, but again, it's completely inefficient what currently is available. And I'd like to also mention that although there are services that do help unemployed workers in their dealings with Centrelink, such as the National Rights Welfare Network and other bodies like that, we actually found that all those bodies that do exist don't offer any services or assistance, generally speaking, to unemployed workers in their dealings with employment service providers. It's actually not within their remit. And that is something that we found completely outrageous, considering the extent of the problem with employment service providers, and that was the main reason why we decided to launch our National Advocacy Hotline last month, which has been quite popular amongst our members.
And how do you get that information out about your hotline?
Well, it's quite restricted at the moment,
Yes.
as you might imagine.
Yeah.
All we've got really is our online presence through our Facebook. We have about 3,500 likes on our Facebook, and we try and distribute it through that. And we have several friendly organisations, such as the Greens. Actually, Adam Band, he posted our ad that we are trying to distribute about the advocacy hotline. We've got a small animated ad that we're trying to distribute, and on our website and through our mailing list. And we've also got cards that we hand out outside employment service providers to get unemployed workers aware that they do have rights, and there is a body that is actively trying to inform them of those rights.
Okay, thanks very much, Mr Bennett.
Senator Seward.
Thank you. I wanted to go to the expansion of the no-show, no-pay penalties and just follow up a little bit further this issue about the balance with the employment service providers. I take it the concern is that if people can get there's the penalty for if you don't show up for the process, and then there's the inappropriate behaviour penalty, and it's the concern that people will think that they just have to, they can't say anything about the plan because if they do, it could be treated as non-compliance by inappropriate behaviour because inappropriate behaviour isn't defined. Is that?
Well, actually, I mean, it's true that inappropriate behaviour is very vaguely defined. What I read in the brief was that inappropriate behaviour is defined as the purpose of the appointment not being reached.
Yeah, which to me really that is not defined, really.
Yes, but I think it's a clear indication from the government that they're giving employment service providers really a blank cheque to do what is necessary to, I suppose, rule the roost over unemployed workers to make them do what employment service providers want. Because at any point, the employment service provider can say, well, you're not doing what is intended for this interview, the purpose of this interview, so we're going to institute a financial penalty for that. And that culture of fear is going to be quite significant across all the 700,000 plus people on Newstart entitlement.
I've had a number of constituents ring my office and talk about their interaction with employment service providers, and of course we only get the complaints. We don't get the. We've had a wonderful. And I will acknowledge that we've had a wonderful experience. So I will acknowledge that, but a lot. And I've had actually ringing and also people talking personally to people where they've had. Well, we've turned up for our appointment and then we've been, it's been cancelled. Or there's been changes made to appointments and people haven't been told, or they may have. Sometimes they feel they haven't been told, or B, it's via communication means that they haven't been, they haven't effectively been told.
Yes.
Is that through your processes? Is that a common occurrence that you find people have concerns about?
Yes, definitely. I'm reminded of one time I was out the front of an employment service provider in Footscray in Melbourne, and I was handing out leaflets with some of our members, and there was this woman who was heavily pregnant, and she came running out of the employment service provider. It was Serena Russo in Footscray, crying because she said that's the second time in a row that she's turned up to an appointment and they've told her, oh, too bad, we need to reschedule, even though she was booked in for that appointment. And there are many cases like that we get through the advocacy hotline. There's one case that, in particular, a woman called Branka Chapman, who I've got her submission with me today. She was she's a Stream 3 or C now, Stream C client, and well, I don't like using the word client. Can we scratch that from the record? She's a Stream C unemployed worker, and she was transferred from one provider to another, actually incorrectly, and the new provider that she was transferred to, Max Employment, then sent her a letter in the mail saying you didn't attend the appointment, but she never received any information about that appointment because during that transition process it's often very messy, and unemployed workers are rarely, or not rarely, but it sometimes happens that they're not informed of their appointment. And this is what happened in the case of Branka Chapman, and that happened about 2 months ago, and she's been trying to fight this ever since because of this 10% reduction, no-show, no-pay penalty. She's trying to chase that $54 or around about that she's lost as a result of these no-show, no-pay penalties, and she just can't get it back because Max Employment refuses to really engage with her about it, and it's just it's just very difficult for unemployed workers to really get any opportunity to review the unfair decisions made by employment service providers in these instances. And in the case of Branka Chapman, she's just completely fed up with it, and she has anxiety issues being a Stream C, and she doesn't want to go into Max Employment because she's been treated so badly through them. And then she's in a position where there's nothing she can do. They won't process her transfer request. She doesn't want to go in there because she has serious anxiety problems, and the way that they've been treating her has been driving her to despair, basically. So there's nowhere for these people to go.
What's the process if a provider refuses, as you've just said, refuses to process a transfer request?
Well, I mean, they would never say that they refuse to process it. They would just say that they haven't got around to it or whatever. But I know that under the guideline, which I think is quite problematic, within the employment service provider has to transfer or has to process the transfer request within 3 business days of it being received. And if they don't do that, then it's implied that the transfer request was not successful. So this basically means that employment service providers can get away with ignoring transfer requests, even though they might be based on good grounds. In the case of Branka Chapman, her transfer request was based on very good grounds because she was transferred for an incorrect reason. They transferred her on the 2-year rule. But I'm sure you're aware of the 2-year rule where when you're at an employment service provider, you have to be transferred after 2 years. Well, that rule doesn't apply to Stream Cs. So she was applied under that rule incorrectly. And then she wanted to transfer back, and Max Employment have continued to not transfer her transfer request, even though it was lodged weeks ago.
So can I just pursue this because it's pertinent to some of the relationships between providers that are going to be given even more power, essentially, under this process, is that I'm a provider, I don't want to lose a client. Is that not one of the factors that plays in?
Definitely, particularly when we're talking about Stream C clients, when it's quite lucrative for employment service providers to have Stream C clients because they would get entitled to more outcomes the more disadvantaged the the unemployed worker. But I'm not particularly across the entire funding structure, but I think that is definitely a consideration.
I'll follow that with the department because there needs to be some process where they can then go back to Centrelink. Can I just go back to the point, and we've still got time, haven't we? Go back to the point you made about not being able to receive help in terms of with the provider from some of the NGOs that are currently helping people on income support. Do I presume therefore that where you can get help, it's more with the Centrelink type payments there's a lot of issues there, rather than actually then the interactions with providers. Is that what you meant when you were?
Yes, well, I meant that if you feel that you've been unfairly treated by an employment service provider, the only options open to you is to contact the Department of Employment, make an official complaint, contact the Ombudsman to try to get them to take an interest in your case, or seek legal advice elsewhere. But maybe a community legal centre would be interested. But as I said, those community legal centres don't, particularly the Welfare Rights Network and those sorts of community legal centres, they would turn you away if you ask them about your employment service provider issue. They're very hamstrung by this. We have good relationship with Social Security Rights Victoria in Melbourne, and if you actually call up their advice hotline, you'll hear the voice, like a recorded message, tell you that if you have a problem with your employment service provider, you must visit this website because they essentially can't help you under their directives from the government. And this is a problem with government-funded organisations, that they are hamstrung, and the government has seemed to make it a priority that employment service provider issues won't be dealt with by government-funded organisations.
Okay.
But I'd also like to make another comment about the deeply flawed system of appeals. At the moment, the government says that because DHS are the ones making the final decision under the law, that provides the ultimate safeguard. Because as you probably know, employment service providers under Social Security law can't make compliance decisions. That decision is made by Centrelink. But there's a number of cases where, and in that case, the department or the government are meant to undertake an independent investigation of a particular appeal, for example. So let me give you the example of someone from our submission who's given us their experiences, Darryl McDonald, and he recently got inappropriate behaviour. inappropriate behaviour penalty for while attending his work for the Dole activity, and the penalty was very harsh in my opinion and in his opinion. He was listening to music whilst attending his work for the Dole activity, and he wasn't even informed of his of the penalty. He was just the work for the Dole supervisor walked past, noted that he was listening to music, and then just went and wrote him up, and then he got a $55 reduction a few days later. He was notified of that a few days later. He then went to Centrelink to appeal that particular decision, but what happened with that is that he received a letter a few days later from the authorised review officer, which told him that the decision is going to be upheld, and that authorised review officer then basically gave him all these reasons that were given to him, that were given to them by the employment service provider that Darryl McDonald disputes, such as that he was told multiple times not to listen to music, and that he was acting inappropriately in this manner. So that shows to me clearly and to the union that Centrelink aren't undertaking independent investigations of these incidents. And in the case of Darryl McDonald, he now has to go to the next phase of review. And that is actually, it's against Social Security law for Centrelink to not investigate those instances independently. And
Thank you, Mr. Bennett.
We got to 10:15.
Have we? I thought we
Yeah,
were at
that's what it says on this one.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
But yeah, and this compliance issue is very serious, and we're actually in the middle of launching a legal challenge on this question, where we're saying that employment service providers are actually making the compliance decisions, in effect, because Centrelink aren't doing their job in terms of independently investigating the recommendations and the participation reports sent to Centrelink. So actually, employment service providers are making compliance decisions, which is against the law, Social Security law, which is a massive problem when it comes to an effective compliance decision and a transparent and fair compliance system.
Yeah. Well, in that case, it's in fact the work for the Dole provider making that call, isn't it? The example that you've just used,
yes,
or the case you've just used, is in fact the work for the Dole provider, not even the employment services provider.
In that case, that's right. Yeah, it was the work for the Dole who, I guess, in that case, they would pass their recommendation on to the provider, who then sends it on.
So you've got sort of like a couple of steps.
Yeah,
removed.
And in that scenario, you can see how important it is that DHS undertake independent investigations of these instances, but they don't. And another thing I'd like to mention is that for other penalties, so let me start again. One of the big problems in this instance is that Darryl McDonald, he actually had his payment taken out of his New Start entitlement. His 10% was taken out before he even got a chance to appeal. So it was taken out, and his appeal was ongoing, and the money was already taken out. So that represents a massive problem. And what I think is needed, and the Australian Unemployed Workers Union strongly recommend that the Senate look at the payment pending review mechanism being applied to New Start recipients as well, because the payment pending review mechanism is something that is applied to other areas of the Centrelink system, where, say, if you had a DSP claim and you had a penalty, or you're a DSP client, you had a penalty and you wanted to review that penalty, you would get payment pending review. So your payment would continue as the appeal was ongoing. And this is, in my opinion, an essential right of unemployed workers to make sure that their appeal is fairly dealt with and not rushed as well, and that they aren't punished as a result of, financially punished as a result of an unfair decision by the employment service provider. If they were given this right to payment pending review, then they would continue to be paid, and the penalty would not be taken out until there is proof of whatever is being alleged of that unemployed worker. So I would strongly recommend that the payment pending review mechanism be expanded to unemployed workers to give them fair right to appeal, because as it stands, it is unemployed workers' right to receive Social Security, and I think this reduction of their payment without adequate avenues of appeal actually transgresses their right to Social Security.
Okay. Can I ask, in...
You have more questions?
Is that okay? The comments that you've made on the number of the job searches issue, can you just expand on that a little bit further in terms of your concerns around insufficient job searches and what the risks are with this particular provision?
Yep. Well, as I mentioned, by increasing the penalties surrounding insufficient job search, I think what the government is doing is making the system very inflexible when flexibility is definitely needed, especially for unemployed workers in regional areas where you may be in a town where there isn't even 20 businesses. So how are you going to apply for 20 businesses per month, which is what you're required to do currently under the Mutual Obligations Guideline, when there isn't even 20 in your area? So, I mean, as it stands at the moment, employment service providers, you might get some lenient ones that would say, oh well, it's unreasonable for me to force you to look for 20 jobs when there just isn't 20 jobs around. Or you might get some other lenient ones that would think, oh well, I'd prefer you to concentrate on realistic job opportunities. But what this bill will do is, I think it would embolden employment service providers, and in regards to the management of a lot of employment service providers, they will push their consultants to really make an issue of job search and ensure that unemployed workers always look for 20 jobs per fortnight, per month, and if they don't, then their New Start will be cancelled, which is, I think, a very concerning development.
Can I ask how much feedback you've had through your processes about how the current process works in terms of the 20 searching for 20 per month and what impact that has on them?
Yes, we have had a lot of information about that, and particularly what is an issue with a lot of our members is that they are basically told by the employment service provider that they have to apply for jobs even if they haven't really applied for them. So let me rephrase. They have to say they've applied for jobs even though they haven't actually applied for them. So the employment service provider would say, well, you have to apply for 20 jobs a month. And the person would, at the other end of the table, the unemployed worker, and say, well, I've put a lot of effort into these 10, a lot of effort, or 5 or whatever, so I don't see the point of just doing the box ticking for another 10 jobs, and just applying for them just for the hell of it. And then,
that's the quote.
And then in that case, the employment service provider would just say, well, just put anything down because I don't want to have to fine you, or I don't want to have to suspend you or put you in any sort of trouble. So it gets to the point where there's been a few cases where unemployed workers feel compelled to just make up jobs on the request of the employment service provider, and they feel that our members feel that process is not only pointless but can be quite humiliating.
So is what you're saying is that they could have applied for 10 because there's 10 jobs available for them to apply for, but they haven't been able to find others to actually apply for, and just have to say they have so that they can say there's 20 jobs that we've applied for.
That's right. There was one case where a member actually they were told by the employment service provider that they have to apply for 20, even though there was only 10 available to them, or 10 that they thought they could actually have a realistic opportunity in getting. So what they did in response to what the employment service provider said is they just went to the yellow pages and just wrote down the first 10 businesses they could find and said, there, are you happy? Is that what you want? So that's already happening today. Imagine how bad it will get when there's going to be a penalty associated with that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now, in your opening statement, you talked about rampant complaints, and you had a lot of calls to your call centre.
I wouldn't say rampant. I didn't use that
you did
word.
say rampant.
No, I didn't use rampant. You can check the record.
Yeah, what I'd like you to do, Mr Bennett, is check the Hansard because you did say rampant, and if you don't mean rampant, I'd like you to write back to the committee and correct the Hansard record, okay? So how many calls would you have a month on your to your call centre?
Per month, well, we've only been going for about a month, so, or at most. We
Oh, I
started...
didn't know that, sorry.
Pardon?
I didn't know you'd only been going for a month.
Yeah, we only started in October, probably the middle to the end of October. So
Yeah.
I would say per day, probably an easier way to tell you, we probably get about... Well, currently we're only operating 3 days a week.
Right.
But we do get calls on other days as well, but we try to make it 3 days a week just to manage expectations, because I assume that once people know about it, it will be quite a popular service because it is free and to join is free as well. But
Yep.
I would say roughly maybe 4 or 5 a day.
4 or 5 a day, roughly?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. Now, you said it's free to join your union. Are you a member of the ACTU, your union?
No.
Are
No,
you
we're
affiliated
not-
to any political party?
No.
But Adam Bant supports you?
Yes.
Yes. Do any Labor Party senators or members support your union?
Not that I know of.
Okay. How many members do you have?
Well, it's a difficult question when you say members, because we have a lot of people who are on our mailing list. For example, we have about 2,500 people on a mailing list and 3,500 likes on Facebook, but that's no indication of membership. In terms of people who've actually filled out a membership form, which is available online now, I'd probably say it'd be about 60, something like
Okay,
that.
could you on notice provide an accurate membership? Yep, excellent. And maybe some geographic spread of that as well.
Yes.
Now, Centrelink and their poor information, is it? Did I take it from your evidence that you have issues with Centrelink's sort of communication with unemployed people?
What do you mean by communication?
Well, letting them know what their rights and responsibilities are.
Yes, that's
Yep.
correct, yes.
Yep. So, I mean, is the problem in how rather than the principles of
I don't
the
understand.
implementation of this type of system? That it's maybe some work needs to be done with Centrelink and officers who are dealing with unemployed people to make sure they're communicating in an appropriate way.
Yes, well, I think Centrelink is definitely part of the problem, but I think the main part of the problem is employment service providers, because they're on the front lines. They're the ones who are the gatekeepers of people's New Start entitlement, as you know. So, and they're the central contact for unemployed workers as well. So it's really the responsibility, as the system is today, of employment service providers to make it clear what the rights are of unemployed workers.
Well, in terms of getting a job, which is what we all want to happen, what role does getting experience play
Getting experience in regards to...
in the workforce?
In the workforce. Well, I can see where you're going with this.
Good. So what's your answer?
Well, clearly experience when it comes to work is an important thing. You need to have a resume with stuff on it, but importantly, the stuff on the resume has to be things that actually attract employers. And in the case of, say, work for the Dole-like activities, it would be quite imprudent for anyone to put work for the Dole on their resume, because it's not something that you want to be informing your prospective employer about.
So does your union support work for the Dole in any form?
No.
No. So how would you encourage those people who are unemployed, and particularly the long-term unemployed, who may be completely out of practice, if you like, of the normal requirements of going to work every day at a certain time, etc., the appropriate ways to dress, appropriate ways to behave in any workforce. How do you propose they get those skills?
Well, I think those skills are very basic skills that I think
Well, they are to the middle class, Mr Bennett, yes.
No, I think I think it's quite elitist to say that because people are unemployed, they don't have skills to turn up on time. I mean, or to dress correctly, or all those other things. I mean, I think if people are given the opportunity for secure, meaningful work, which is what this government has systematically denied unemployed people for decades.
Well, I absolutely reject that assertion, Mr Bennett.
Well, I advise you to look at the statistics that I
I
brought up
advise you to
earlier.
look at the unemployment data released yesterday, but let's not have a debate
But
about it.
the
I really want to get your
11.25
understanding and want you on the record
job seekers
of not
per job
supporting
vacancy.
unemployed people's
can you argue
access
with
to work for the Dole. Sorry?
Pardon? I didn't hear that.
Yeah, because you were talking while the Chair was talking. Thank you, Mr Bennett. I know you've been given some homework. We look forward to it.
Chair, I think you should let Mr Bennett was trying to correct the record there in terms of his response to your assertion that he didn't support access to work for the Dole.
Mr Bennett said his union does not support work for the Dole. Is that right?
That's different to access to work for the Dole. You paraphrased what he said. Now, I think Mr Bennett was trying to correct that and explain himself a bit further. You've got time. We've got another 5 minutes with this witness. Could you please let Mr Bennett finish what he was trying to say so that there is an accurate reflection and we're clear about what his position is?
Yep, go for it, Mr Bennett.
Well, you're completely right, Senator McKenzie, when you say that we don't support work for the Dole, because we don't support work for the Dole. We think it's a completely punitive exercise that actually, as a lot of the studies show, reduces I'm sure that you're aware of those studies that say that doing work for the Dole doesn't increase your chances of finding paid employment, and that's something that is widely recognised. So, work for the Dole is actually putting government money into a program that doesn't create one single job. I mean, the Job Active program is $6.8 billion over 4 years. Wouldn't it be better to put that money that is now going to a punitive regime of activities that don't actually increase the likelihood of unemployed workers finding work? Wouldn't it be better to put that money into actual job creation? Because at the moment, as I was mentioned earlier, there are 11.25 job seekers competing for every job vacancy, going by the ABS and Department of Employment records. So clearly there is a problem. I think we can all recognise there is a problem of lack of work, lack of available jobs. So I think that it needs to be recognised. When the first thing you should recognise when talking about employment in this country is the lack of jobs. That has to be the first point of call. And in our opinion, the whole regime that the government has created, which puts a series of expectations on unemployed workers to attend appointments and activities, crumbles to the ground when you consider there aren't any jobs. So what are they trying to put people into if there are 11.25 job seekers competing for every job vacancy? I mean, I think that is the elephant in the room when it comes to unemployment and the way that unemployed people are treated. And I think that needs to be seriously acknowledged and dealt with by politicians in general.
Thank you, Mr Bennett. I now call